It had been an exhausting week, and all I wanted was a quiet morning before tackling the day's responsibilities. My younger sister, Emily, who had been wheelchair-bound since a tragic accident 5 years ago, was eager to get some fresh air, as she did every morning. However, the moment I opened our front door, my heart nearly stopped. Emily's wheelchair, her lifeline to the outside world, was chained to the porch railing with thick metal links, locked tightly in place with a heavy-duty padlock. At first, I thought it was a cruel prank, but as I examined the chains, I saw a note attached to them. My hands trembled as I tore it off, my eyes scanning the words, HOA regulations. Unauthorized mobility devices must remain stationary until approved for external use. Violations will result in further action. My blood boiled. I had heard rumors about our HOA enforcing bizarre and unreasonable rules. But this was inhumane. Emily, confused, wheeled herself forward and gasped. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. I didn't want to panic her, but there was no way to sugarcoat it. "The HOA locked your chair," I said through clenched teeth, showing her the note. Her face paled. "They can't do that. This is my mobility aid. This is illegal." She was right. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, this was not just a violation of her rights. It was an outright act of cruelty. Furious, I stormed inside, grabbed my phone, and dialed the HOA office. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. It was clear they were avoiding confrontation. My next call was to a locksmith, but before I could even request help, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "You can try calling all you want." A smug voice on the other end sneered. "The chains stay. HOA policy." My grip on the phone tightened. "This is illegal. You can't restrict someone's mobility like this." I snapped. The man chuckled. "Read the fine print of your contract. You signed it when you moved in." My mind raced. We had been in this neighborhood for only a year, and while I had skimmed through the HOA agreement, I had never seen anything mentioning restrictions on wheelchairs. "Who is this?" I demanded. "Just someone making sure rules are followed." "Have a nice day," he said before hanging up. I turned back to Emily, who was on the verge of tears. She wasn't just trapped physically. She was humiliated, and that infuriated me even more. I grabbed a pair of bolt cutters from the garage, determined to break the chains myself. But as I stepped outside, I noticed a security camera. One that wasn't ours, pointed directly at our porch. My stomach twisted. Had it always been there? A bad feeling crept over me. This wasn't just about an overreaching HOA. Something much darker was happening. I tried cutting the chains, but they were industrial grade, designed to withstand any amateur attempts at removal. Emily's frustration grew as she banged on the armrests of her chair. "What are we supposed to do now?" she asked, her voice shaking. "They can't just keep me here like a prisoner." I had no answers, only rage. The next step was clear. I needed to get to the HOA office in person. I turned to Emily. "Stay put for a bit. I'm going to handle this." She crossed her arms. "Like hell I'm staying put. I want answers too." I knew better than to argue with her when she was this determined. Together, we got into the car and drove to the HOA's main building, which sat at the entrance of our pristine, suburban neighborhood. The moment we walked in, we were met with fake smiles from the receptionist. "How can I help you today?" she asked sweetly. I shoved the note onto the counter. "Explain this." The receptionist's smile faltered for only a second before she regained composure. "Oh, that's just a simple regulation we enforce to ensure neighborhood aesthetics and safety," she said dismissively. "Surely you understand?" My jaw clenched. "Safety? My sister is disabled. You've effectively imprisoned her on our property. This isn't about safety. It's about control." The receptionist sighed as if I were an annoyance. "I'm afraid if you have complaints, you'll need to file them formally with the HOA board. They meet once a month. Your next available date will be in 4 weeks. 4 weeks? Emily practically shouted. "I need to move freely today, not a month from now." The receptionist only shrugged. "I'm sorry, But rules are rules. That was it. I wasn't going to play their game. You're going to remove those chains today, I demanded. The receptionist raised an eyebrow, clearly entertained. Oh? And if we don't? I leaned in, lowering my voice. Then I'm calling an attorney. For the first time, she hesitated. But before she could respond, a door behind her opened, and a tall man in a green HOA uniform stepped out. He looked me up and down before smirking. Is there a problem here? I met his gaze without flinching. Yeah, your people chained my sister's wheelchair to our house. That's not just a problem. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. The man chuckled. A lawsuit? Over a simple rule enforcement? You're overreacting. Emily rolled forward, her voice steady. You do realize what you've done is a federal violation, right? The man waved a dismissive hand. You're free to leave a complaint. Otherwise, have a nice day. I wanted to scream. The arrogance, the blatant disregard for human decency, it was infuriating. But as I clenched my fists, something in the man's expression changed. A flicker of concern? It was subtle, but it was there. That was when I realized something. He wasn't worried about our complaint. He was worried about something else. And I was going to find out what. I clenched my fists, staring down the smug HOA officer who had just dismissed our complaint like we were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. My sister, Emily, sat in her wheelchair beside me, her knuckles white from gripping the armrests in frustration. The receptionist, still wearing that fake, plastered smile, had already turned her attention to her computer screen, ignoring us entirely. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to knock everything off that counter and demand justice, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. Yelling wouldn't get us anywhere. Instead, I leaned forward, locking eyes with the HOA officer. You don't seem to understand. What you did is not just an inconvenience, it's a crime. Chaining down a disabled person's mobility aid is a violation of federal law. If you don't remove those chains immediately, I will personally see to it that you regret it. The officer scoffed, crossing his arms over his broad chest. Regret it? Kid, I've been working this job for over a decade. I know exactly what I can and can't do. You think I'd put those chains on without legal backing? Emily's voice was ice cold. Legal backing? Show me where in the HOA regulations it says you can physically restrain someone in their own home. The man smirked but said nothing. I pressed on. We're not leaving until you give us answers. I want the HOA president here now. At that, the receptionist finally spoke up. The president isn't available for unannounced complaints. If you want a meeting, you'll have to schedule it. Emily exhaled sharply. That's not going to work. My wheelchair is literally bolted to my house. You're telling me I have to wait weeks for someone to address that? The officer glanced at the receptionist before shaking his head. Look, I'll make this simple for you. The chains stay. You're in violation of HOA policy. I practically growled. Violation of what? We've lived there for a year. No one ever said a word about wheelchairs being a problem. The officer's smirk grew wider. Didn't you read the update in last month's newsletter? I froze. What update? Emily and I exchanged a glance. We had received the HOA's monthly newsletters. Sure, but they were always full of nonsense. Reminders to trim hedges, fines for minor violations like leaving trash bins out too long, warnings about approved lawn decorations. Nothing we ever cared about. But the officer's face told me that buried somewhere in that useless newsletter had been a change in policy. The officer chuckled, clearly enjoying our confusion. Ah, so you didn't read it. That's on you. Emily wheeled forward, her voice dangerously low. And what exactly did this update say? The officer shrugged. New regulations for outdoor storage. Unapproved items can't be left visible on front porches or driveways without HOA clearance. Your wheelchair falls under that category. My jaw dropped. You're comparing a mobility aid to trash cans and lawn ornaments? He smirked. The rules are the rules. My hands shook with fury. This wasn't just bureaucracy. This was discrimination. Let me get this straight. You snuck a rule into a newsletter, didn't give anyone notice, and now you're using it to trap my sister inside her own home. The officer's smirk faded slightly, but he still didn't back down. Call it what you want. You agreed to HOA policies when you moved in. That was the last straw. You think you're untouchable, don't you? I hissed. You think just because you've got some stupid rulebook, you can do whatever you want? The officer's eyes darkened. I think you should leave. Emily held up her phone. Not until I record you saying that you, as a representative of this HOA, believe it's legal to chain down a disabled person's wheelchair. The officer's face paled slightly. The smug confidence he had before wavered, just for a moment. He knew how bad this looked. Put that phone away, he snapped. Emily didn't. Say it again. Put the damn phone away. The sudden shift in his demeanor told me everything I needed to know. He was scared. Not of us, but of something bigger. There was something about this rule, about this entire situation, that he didn't want on record. I narrowed my eyes. Who ordered this? The officer stayed silent. The president? I pushed. Or someone else? Still nothing. Emily's expression turned stone cold. Then we'll go public. The media would love this story. That got him. The officer exhaled sharply and turned to the receptionist. Call security. The receptionist, who had been pretending not to listen, hesitated. Are you sure? The officer glared at her. I said, call security. Emily turned to me. We need to go. I hated the idea of backing down, but I knew she was right. This was bigger than just a confrontation at the HOA office. We needed real legal backing. As we turned to leave, the officer called after us. Try anything stupid, and you'll regret it. I froze. That wasn't just a threat. That was a warning. We drove home in silence, both of us deep in thought. The moment we arrived, I grabbed my laptop and began searching for any legal recourse we could take. I found the official HOA regulations for our neighborhood and combed through them. Nothing about wheelchairs. Nothing about mobility aids. The officer had been lying through his teeth. But then something strange happened. I tried accessing the online archive for past newsletters to find the so-called policy update. The page was gone. 404 error. I refreshed the page. Nothing. Emily leaned over my shoulder. They're hiding something. I nodded. And I'm going to find out what. We weren't just dealing with an overreaching HOA. We were dealing with something much worse. And I had the sinking suspicion that someone else had already been watching them. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's wheelchair, bound by thick metal chains, a silent testament to the cruelty and corruption of the HOA. I replayed the confrontation with the officer in my head, over and over again, analyzing every detail. He had been smug, until Emily pulled out her phone. That was when the mask had slipped, when his confidence wavered. He knew something he didn't want on record. By morning, I had a plan. Step 1, contact a lawyer. Step 2, dig deeper into the HOA's shady policies. Step 3, expose them. Emily, as usual, was one step ahead of me. I already called an attorney, she said over breakfast, her expression hard. They're reviewing our case. I blinked. Wait, what? When did you? While you were stress-refreshing that error page all night, she said, raising an eyebrow. I figured we needed professional help. I exhaled. Okay, good. What did they say? They're interested, but they need more evidence. We need to prove the HOA is knowingly violating disability rights and that this isn't just enforcing policy. I nodded. That made sense. Then we need to find that newsletter update. Emily crossed her arms. Already tried. It's wiped from the HOA website. Every archive I checked leads to a dead link. It's like it never existed. My stomach churned. The officer had been lying through his teeth. Then we get a physical copy. Emily's eyes lit up. The HOA office keeps print records. I saw the filing cabinets behind the receptionist's desk. That gave me an idea. They won't just hand them over if we ask. But what if we don't ask? Emily smirked. You're thinking break-in. I grinned. I'm thinking strategic snooping. Our plan was simple. Distract the receptionist, slip into the records room, and find the newsletter. But first, we needed leverage. the first crack in the HOA's armor. Before we left, I made some calls. First, I contacted our local disability rights organization. They were outraged when I explained what had happened to Emily. "This is a clear violation of the ADA," the representative told me. "If you can get written proof of this policy, we can take legal action immediately." That was all I needed to hear. Next, I posted on the neighborhood's private online forum. I kept it vague, asking if anyone else had noticed strange rule changes in recent months. Within an hour, I had over a dozen replies. People were angry. Someone had been fined $500 for having wind chimes. Another family was threatened with eviction over a basketball hoop. A veteran was forced to remove his disability ramp because it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. This wasn't just about Emily. The HOA was running a racket. The plan in motion. We arrived at the HOA office that afternoon. Emily went in first, demanding to file a formal complaint, which forced the receptionist to pull out a mountain of paperwork. While she was distracted, I slipped behind the counter and into the back office. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls. I moved quickly, scanning labels. Newsletters. There. I yanked open the drawer marked 2025 and flipped through the neatly arranged documents. January, February, March, April. I pulled it out, scanning the pages. And then I saw it. Section 7.3, Restrictions on Unapproved Outdoor Storage and Equipment. All items not explicitly listed in the approved HOA guidelines must remain within the primary residence or be secured to prevent external movement. This includes, but is not limited to, bicycles, scooters, children's toys, and mobility devices. Mobility devices. They had snuck it in under the same category as toys and bikes. I took out my phone and snapped pictures. That was all the proof we needed. But as I turned to leave, a voice stopped me cold. "You shouldn't be back here." I whirled around. The officer from yesterday, his name tag read Davenport, was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. I forced a casual smile. "Just grabbing some paperwork." His eyes narrowed. "You're trespassing." I shrugged. "And you're violating federal law." A tense silence stretched between us. Then, to my surprise, Davenport sighed. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." I stiffened. "Try me." He hesitated, glancing at the door. Then, in a low voice, he said something I never expected. "The FBI's already watching us." I blinked. "What?" Davenport exhaled. "Look, I can't say much, but if you're smart, you'll drop this. Walk away, before you get caught up in something bigger than a few HOA fines." My pulse pounded. Why is the FBI involved? He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside, motioning toward the door. "Go home." I should have left. I should have grabbed Emily and run. But instead, I asked one final question. "Who ordered the wheelchair policy?" Davenport hesitated. And then, so quietly I barely heard it, he said, "Not the HOA." A chill ran down my spine. I left without another word, my mind spinning. Not the HOA. Then who? Emily was waiting for me outside. "Well," I handed her my phone, letting her read the photos of the newsletter. Her eyes darkened. "Got em." But I was still stuck on what Davenport had said. "The FBI's involved," I muttered. "Something bigger is happening here." Emily frowned. "Bigger than discrimination?" I nodded. "Way bigger." I didn't know it yet, but we were about to uncover something far more sinister than HOA corruption. We had just kicked a hornet's nest, and the FBI had been waiting for someone to do exactly that. The ride home was silent, but my mind was racing. Emily kept glancing at me, no doubt sensing the tension radiating off me in waves. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Davenport's warning echoed in my head. The FBI's already watching us. What the hell did that mean? Emily finally broke the silence. "Okay, spill." I exhaled, still trying to process everything. Davenport said the FBI is already investigating the HOA. Emily's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, what?" I nodded. "And that the wheelchair policy? It didn't come from the HOA." She frowned. "Then who did it come from?" That's what I'm trying to figure out. We pulled into the driveway, and my stomach twisted when I saw the chains still wrapped around Emily's wheelchair. The sight made my blood boil all over again. I was done playing defense. It was time to hit back. I grabbed my laptop the second we got inside, my fingers flying across the keyboard. If the FBI was involved, there had to be some kind of public record. A case number, a warrant, something. I searched for recent federal investigations into HOAs, but nothing relevant popped up. No news articles, no court records. It was like this entire situation didn't exist outside of our neighborhood. Frustrated, I switched tactics. I searched the names of the HOA board members, checking for anything suspicious. That's when I found it. Our HOA president, Martin Vance, had been named in a lawsuit 5 years ago. The charge? Fraud and embezzlement. My pulse quickened as I read through the court documents. The case had been sealed, which meant details were scarce, but the summary mentioned misappropriation of HOA funds and suspicious land acquisitions. The charges had been dropped due to lack of evidence. Emily leaned over my shoulder. What does that mean? I frowned. It means Vance was stealing money from HOA members, but they couldn't prove it. She tilted her head. So he got away with it? For now, I muttered. But why would the FBI be watching him now? The case was years old. What had changed? That's when I had another thought. If the FBI was already investigating, they might have agents undercover. What if Davenport wasn't just an HOA enforcer? What if he was working with the feds? It was a long shot, but I had to find out. A mysterious visitor. Just as I was about to dig deeper, there was a knock at the door. Emily and I exchanged a glance. No one ever just showed up at our house unannounced. I peered through the peephole. A man in a dark suit stood on our porch, hands folded neatly in front of him. FBI? Had to be. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Can I help you? The man flashed a badge. Agent Carter. FBI. Emily rolled up beside me. Took you guys long enough. Agent Carter smiled faintly. Mind if we come in? I leaned out and saw another agent standing near a black SUV parked down the street. They weren't taking any chances. I stepped aside. Yeah, come in. Carter took a seat in our living room while his partner, a woman with sharp eyes, remained standing by the door. She hadn't said a word, but I could tell she was assessing every detail of our home. Carter folded his hands. I understand you've had a recent altercation with your HOA. I crossed my arms. More like they illegally detained my sister. Carter nodded. That's why we're here. Emily frowned. You're investigating them? He hesitated. Yes, but not for the reasons you think. I narrowed my eyes. Then what are you investigating? Carter glanced at his partner, then back at us. Have you ever heard of Operation Shell Game? I shook my head. No. Emily leaned forward. What is it? Carter sighed. It's an ongoing federal investigation into fraudulent land acquisitions and money laundering schemes tied to homeowner associations across the country. Your HOA is one of our targets. A chill ran down my spine. Emily's mouth tightened. So they're stealing money? Carter nodded. Yes, but it's more than that. We believe certain board members are using HOA policies to force homeowners into violations, then slapping them with massive fines. When homeowners can't pay, they're pressured into selling their properties at reduced prices, often to shell companies controlled by the same people running the HOA. My jaw clenched. They're stealing people's homes. Carter nodded. And flipping them for profit. I felt sick. And the wheelchair policy? Carter's expression darkened. That's where things get even more complicated. We believe your HOA is testing methods of forced compliance. If they can get away with illegally restraining a disabled resident, it sets a precedent. They can escalate from there. Emily's hands clenched into fists. So I'm their experiment? Carter nodded grimly. Essentially. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. Why haven't you stopped them? Carter exchanged another glance with his partner. We need irrefutable evidence. That's where you come in. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Carter leaned forward. You've already drawn their attention. They know you're fighting back. If you push a little harder, we believe they'll make a critical mistake. One we can use. I swallowed hard. You want us to be bait. Carter didn't deny it. Emily's voice was ice cold. What happens if they don't make a mistake? Carter's partner finally spoke. Then we intervene. The way she said it sent a shiver down my spine. I looked at Emily. What do you think? She took a deep breath, then nodded. Let's burn these bastards to the ground. Carter smiled. That's what we were hoping you'd say. He pulled a small recording device from his pocket and slid it across the table. Wear this during your next confrontation. We'll be listening. Emily picked it up, turning it over in her hands. And if they catch us? Carter's smile faded. Then we moved to Plan B. I exhaled slowly. And what's Plan B? His partner's eyes were cold. We take them down by force. I had no idea what we were about to walk into. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just about the HOA anymore. It was about exposing a massive criminal operation hiding in plain sight. And Emily and I were right in the middle of it. The air felt heavier after the FBI left. The reality of what we had just agreed to was sinking in. This wasn't just about Emily's wheelchair anymore. We were about to go head-to-head with a criminal organization disguised as a homeowners association. One that had already gotten away with fraud, property theft, and who knew what else. Emily twirled the tiny recording device between her fingers. So, what's the plan? I exhaled. We do exactly what the FBI wants. We push them. Hard. Emily smirked. I was hoping you'd say that. The next morning, we got to work. Our first move was to make as much noise as possible. Emily posted the pictures of her chained-down wheelchair on every social media platform she could think of. She tagged disability rights organizations, news stations, and legal advocacy groups. Within hours, the post was going viral. People were furious. The HOA's official page was flooded with comments demanding an explanation. Then came the phone calls. The local news caught wind of the story and wanted an interview. By noon, we had 3 different reporters asking for statements. Emily didn't hesitate. She sat in front of the camera, fire in her eyes, and told the world exactly what had happened. The HOA illegally detained me, she said, voice steady. They violated my rights, and I want people to know. If they can do this to me, they can do it to anyone. It was the kind of headline that couldn't be ignored. By evening, the HOA board members were scrambling. Their official statement was a disaster, full of legal jargon and empty apologies. It only made people angrier. But we weren't done yet. The trap is set. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for that Friday. It was supposed to be a closed-door session, but public pressure forced them to allow residents to attend. Emily and I showed up early. The board members looked nervous. Martin Vance, the HOA president, kept checking his phone, sweat beading on his forehead. The moment we walked in, the room fell silent. "Welcome," Vance said stiffly. "We understand there are some concerns." I folded my arms. "Yeah, like why you think you can chain down a disabled person's wheelchair." Vance's jaw tightened. The policy was misinterpreted. Emily slammed the printed newsletter onto the table. It was right here, in black and white. You grouped mobility devices with toys and bicycles. You knew exactly what you were doing. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Other homeowners were whispering to each other, exchanging glances. The tension was thick. One of the other board members, an older woman with a pinched face, cleared her throat. "Miss Turner, we understand your frustration, but our policies are in place to maintain property values." Emily's voice was ice. "What about the families you fined into foreclosure? The veterans you forced to remove their disability ramps? How does that increase property values?" The woman's mouth opened, but no words came out. Vance's hand curled into a fist. "If you have complaints, file them through the proper channels." I leaned forward. "We did. You ignored them." A beat of silence. Then Emily pulled out the recording device. "You're being recorded, by the way." Vance's face turned red. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. That's when the doors burst open. The FBI strikes. Agent Carter and his partner strode into the room, flanked by 3 uniformed officers. The entire room froze. "Martin Vance," Carter announced, pulling out a warrant. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, illegal property seizures, and money laundering." Vance's chair scraped back violently as he stood. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "You can't just—" Carter cut him off. "We've been investigating you for months. We have proof that you and your associates have been illegally seizing properties through manipulated violations. We have bank records showing money funneled through shell companies. And, thanks to your recent actions against Miss Turner, we now have evidence of federal ADA violations." The other board members paled. The older woman stammered, I didn't know." Carter turned to her. "We'll find out exactly how much you knew soon enough." The officers moved in, handcuffing Vance as he shouted protests. "This is a mistake. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." "Tell it to the judge," Carter said flatly. As they dragged him out, the room exploded into chaos. Some homeowners were cheering. Others were demanding answers. The remaining board members looked like they wanted to disappear. Emily rolled up beside me, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Well, that went well." I exhaled, feeling the weight of the past week finally lift. Yeah, it did. Justice is served. Over the next few weeks, the full extent of the HOA's corruption came to light. The FBI seized financial records, uncovering years of fraud. Multiple board members were indicted. The HOA was dissolved. A new neighborhood association was formed, one that actually represented the residents instead of exploiting them. The ridiculous policies were thrown out. Fines were refunded. People who had lost their homes were given legal aid to fight back. Emily's story kept spreading. She became a voice for disability rights, using her platform to expose corrupt HOAs across the country. One afternoon, she got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper with 2 words. "Good work." We both knew who it was from. As for me, I learned something important. Bullies don't stop unless you stand up to them. And sometimes, when you push back hard enough, the whole rotten system comes crashing down.